In a recent letter to all Amazon shareholders, Jeff Bezos revealed his plan to, quote, algorithmically shuffle workers around the warehouse based on which isolated muscle tendon groups they are repetitively grinding. So according to Vice, Bezos' sentiments in the letter laments workplace injuries as a result of overworking, but never acknowledges the most obvious solution here, which would be slowing the pace of that work.
Edward Ongweso Jr., staff writer for Vice's Motherboard, joins us now to discuss. Edward, welcome. If you could just start by walking us through this report, that would be fantastic. There's a lot in it, so if you could just walk us through it, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, so the letter was Bezos' last letter as chief executive to the shareholders. And in it, he tries to frame his progress. I mean, as stupendous growth for the company, stupendous growth for the shares and returns to investors. He does some back of the envelope map to try to argue that Amazon has provided hundreds of billions of dollars in value for customers, vendors, shareholders, and so on and so forth. And then he gets to the point where he's, saying, yeah, people criticize us for having unsafe working conditions. And some of it is true, but not all of it is true. And so what we're going to do is we figured out through analysis and through technology, we figured out why our workers are getting hurt so much. And we're going to use that technology to just cycle them through some of the greatest hits in the warehouse so that they don't get hurt all at once, and it just builds up over time, essentially.
So he can sort of extend the shelf life, so to speak, of his workforce, rather than actually ameliorate the conditions which are leading to a large number, a disproportionate number, according to other reports, as compared to other warehouses, of injuries among his workforce.
Yeah, I think this is key because Amazon also in of itself has a sort of churn rate that needs to happen. That churn rate prevents union organizing. That churn rate prevents work agitation. That churn rate prevents solidarity amongst workers and is key to this atomized workplace that Bezos has, innovated. Bezos and his, company have innovated. And so, to still do it where they're cycling through different types of work doesn't actually change that. It does change the injury rate, but you're still going to be doing backbreaking and grueling labor every day, all day. The difference is that it's just going to target different muscle groups. One day it's going to be leg day, and then the next is going to be arm day.
And what sort of data do you have to collect to even be able to, I mean, they're talking about like fine-tune analysis of which muscle and tendon groups workers are using. Talk about how that fits more broadly into the way that Amazon surveils their workers.
Part of it is the safety reports that they don't release and they hide or cover up. Part of it is the surveillance that they have, wearables, surveillance cameras, surveillance systems embedded through most of the warehouses and the delivery process. And then I'm sure part of it is probably new proprietary tech they've developed, figuring out some way to simulate muscle loads or the load of work that's going to be applied to certain muscle groups. I'm sure some of it is also bringing in outside advisors to figure out, in other places, what are the muscle groups that are worked on the most by this type or that type of work. So it is a combination of, I'm sure, outside, advisors and consultants and internal surveillance, which they have plenty of, because one of the things that Amazon does best is, watching its workers and using that data to figure out new ways to augment their behavior or new ways to modify their working schedule or their working pattern so that it can squeeze more production out of them.
Jeff Bezos is just like a parody of the dead-eyed Silicon Valley stereotype in that, this letter is creepy and robotic. And I wonder, Edward, if there's a way to read it as almost a concession that this is a serious problem for Amazon. I mean, we've seen the unionization push that absolutely terrified Amazon. And in the letter, the way that you have him sort of robotically talking about the human beings who he employs, it sounds as though he's actually saying, look, this has become an issue. Is there a way to read this almost as a concession?
Yeah, I think there are two ways to read it. One is how I think a lot of people in the business press read it, which is amazing. There are some people who are gushing over how, smart and brilliant and conciliatory the letter was. And another way to read it is, raising a red flag, right? Because Bezos himself talks about how as executive chairman, he's going to be trying to focus on making the warehouse safer. He had to mention the union drive in of itself, and usually Amazon's strategy with this sort of stuff is to just ignore it, right, and let it die in shadows. And there are going to be attempts, right, to prove that, at least to workers, that they don't really need a union, that a union would hurt them, that a union might actually even jeopardize their jobs. But to the public, there's going to be a more experimentation with PR to try to show that actually a union would get in the way of what we do because we're so good as a workplace. We're so safe. We're so generous with our compensation. And also it would affect the way that you get your goods and services, right? Because a big reason why Amazon is so quick, right? Why you have 1 day shipping, 2 day shipping, the reason why it has monopolies in so many, instances, right, or is able to build up its industries is because of, the sheer amount of exploitation that goes on in those warehouses, that it allow it to leverage some money or other profits into other endeavors, as well as, profits that it generates in other businesses like AWS. But the exploitation is key to why it's so ubiquitous and productive. And so maybe a case is going to be made to the public that you have to choose, essentially. Like, do you want the convenience, or do you want, a workplace that you think is better than what we do right now?
Yeah, that's so well put. Edward, thank you so much. Great to have you.
Thanks.
Coming up, Sagar's interview with UFO expert and filmmaker Jeremy Corbell. That'll be interesting when Rising returns.